So, as most of you guys know, we're in the middle of a sermon series that we've just enjoyed so much, we've extended it on kingdom culture. What makes our culture here so different? Turn to the person next to go, so different, so different from the culture of the world. Yeah? And we're just really exploring it together and not assuming it. We're looking at how radically we are meant to be changed together by the life of God that is in us. And my subject today is rest. And I chose that subject because I really need it. I don't just mean put your feet up over Christmas, dear. I mean, I need to know how to do this because I believe it's not just a kingdom value, it's actually a kingdom weapon. And it is totally culture contrary, counterculture in our today's world. And because I know I need it, I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I want to do that because I want to explore it for myself. So I am not teaching as somebody that's got it sussed. Yeah. I lived with the most beautiful German friend once. We lived with them in the West End in Warren Street, just off Tottenham Court Road for a few years together. A lovely German couple, still very good friends of ours. And she was just very different from me. She would come home. She was a very active, busy nurse, and she would light a candle and sit and do nothing. I just light a candle and I like to spend the time with the Lord, she would go. I would just like to be with him. And, you know, that woman's soul was at peace. Well, I can quite identify with a guy called Jeff Lucas, who is a lovely Christian teacher and writer, who said that when he is finally well and truly dead and is thrown into his grave, he will still be spasming and twitching, not with the life of Jesus pouring out of him like it was done, well, like it was with Old Testament prophets, yeah? But with adrenaline and stress from all his to-do lists that is still coursing through him well after his heart has stopped beating. Well, I'm quite like him. As a little girl, I was always on the move. My grandma lived with us. We lived in a huge old house, and she had a big wardrobe, and I often spent my days in her room. It was one of my happiest places, dancing in front of the wardrobe because it had a big mirror. And I started ballet at 3, and so I was practicing my pirouettes and my points and my whatever else I was practicing. And I was always dancing. If I was watching TV, I was still dancing. If we were talking, I was still dancing. And I remember my mum, her daughter, and her, I just remember them looking at me sagely. I mean, they weren't either of them from Yorkshire, but that child's got worms, they used to say. Doesn't sit still, that child's got worms. I was told I had worms all the way through my childhood. Now, I might have done, actually, because I did have this penchant, I'll just confess it to you, for raw sausages, which isn't good, is it? I just love them. I didn't eat like 10 a day, but the occasional raw sausage. And I like dog biscuits, I know. It explains such a lot. The odd bonio and a Richmond's basic. I know, it explains so much. So maybe, you know, when I get there, they will find that I had some company in my tummy. I don't know. I think it was actually because one of our sons was diagnosed or self-diagnosed as ADHD as he became a young adult. And we were listening to some podcasts and some information about that. And I said to Vince, is it Seb? Is it like him? And he said, well, more to the point, love, it's completely like you. Really? He said, can't sit still. We never start a prayer meeting or any meeting with you in the room. You're always just going to do this and just going to quickly get a wash on. And, oh, I must go and change the loo paper. And have we got clean towels? And, you know, during the worship, I've gone out and done all of that just because you need to, you know. So for me, the concept of sitting still is really, really challenging. But as I said, I believe that rest is important, deeply important to the way God created us. So I want to explore together how we get there, people. here's something to start off with. It was the first thing that came into my mind when I thought about rest. Was he died in around 430 BC. Zeno, the Greek philosopher, said an arrow at flight is at rest. As it flies, an arrow in flight is at rest. Meaning at any point, if you at that moment stop that arrow, it's actually still. Of course it progresses, but at every nanosecond it's still. And more to the point, he said philosophically an arrow should never arrive, because you can always half the distance, even if it's an infinitesimally small distance between where the tip of the arrow is and where it's meant to land. You can always cut it in half, however small it is. So it should philosophically never arrive. That is known as the Zenonian paradox, the paradox of Zeno. Hey, what are you laughing about? So I'm a bit of a Zenonian paradox myself, in that what I'm wanting to learn is how to be still in the place of movement, how to be still inside in the place of movement, because actually all creation is moving. We are, and I'm sorry to say this, we are either moving towards God or away from him. There is no option of just treading water. We either move in our lives towards the center of the universe, the power, the personality of love, and that is the direction that draws us, or we move away into darkness, into aridity, into death. And we go one way or the other. There isn't a neutral option. However many people say, I don't believe in God, I don't think much about God, you're actually moving inside one way or the other in your life choices and your decisions. So how do we do that while being at rest? I've been very influenced as I've been preparing this sermon on the work of Lucy Peppiatt, who's the principal of Westminster Theological College. I don't want to tell you that all of this comes from me. There have been quite a few bits that I read, but she more than anyone. I'm going to start off with another one of my favorite quotes, which is a bit later than Zeno, quite a lot later actually, which is St. Augustine, the guy from Hippo. Confusingly, there are two St. Augustines, not the one that came to the UK, but the guy from North Africa, who said, "You made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are always restless until we find our rest in you." Oh, isn't that true? Look at our society. Look at the restlessness of our world. You know, my dear in-laws, they both, I trust, came to the Lord at the end. One certainly did, but I believe my mum-in-law did as well, in the way she behaved in the 24 hours before she died. But my goodness, those people. They moved about every 3 years, was it, throughout your life, just to find a slightly better house with a slightly better view, and the double glazing being a little bit tighter, and the front garden looking a little bit better. And maybe if they lived in this village, they'd be more content. Or if they lived up high, the view would be better. Do you know what I mean? They were constantly trying, restless until we find our rest. And they were looking for the absolute formula to make themselves feel, I mean, Mary, she was a domestic science teacher. She was actually a domestic science goddess. So she was very intimidating as a mum-in-law, potential mum-in-law. I met her when I was really young. As many of you know, I met Vince when we were 17. But you couldn't sit down at table with her ever without her saying, particularly outside, they often ate outside, but wouldn't you like to move your chair a bit closer to the table, dear? And what about moving a bit more into the sun, out of the sun? Look, if you sit here, you see the aspidistra. Oh, but if you sit there, you can look at the bird table. You know, you just couldn't sit there and eat a sausage. You couldn't. You were constantly being optimized. Yeah? Bless her. She just wanted me to have a lovely time, but as soon as the fork was in your mouth, you were being shoved, you know, because she wanted it to be perfect. Because she didn't have that inner peace, that inner rest. Well then, Jesus, proximity to Jesus, knowing Jesus, inspired by Jesus, connection with Jesus, surely he is not just our high watermark in terms of rest, but our living, pulsating, activated example, our tutor, if you like. Do you remember some of the stories about Jesus resting inappropriately? Having, a quick kip in the middle of a massive thunderstorm that was leaving his friends terrified. Happily chilling out and talking to a woman of all people and teaching her amongst others, while the woman should have been in cultural norms of the time doing hospitality and bustling around in a stress ball like her sister was. It's really clear when Jesus actually said to his friends, come away with me and get some rest, that he was actually very good at chilling. They didn't actually get rest at that particular moment, but he tried to give them all rest together. They actually got 5,000 hungry people turn up with them, which isn't the most restful experience. But he obviously knew how to do it. And that's where we come to the beautiful quote. That we've heard already. I'm going to read it again. It's very famous, this version as well, but I just so love it. I'm going to read it from the Message. So just let this soak and think if you need this recipe. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me. And you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Beautiful, isn't it? I could just leave it there, really. I want to start this bit. I've got sort of 3 things that really jumped out to me from this passage, this bit here. But I want to start with that, come to me. And say to you, you know what? It isn't really a polite suggestion. It is a command. It's not just a little bit of helpful, one of those books you read at the airport, how to get your life squeaky and shiny in 3 easy lessons so that your kids all sing Come By Our in unison. It's not a self-help. You might want this little massage. It's not a tweak. It is a command. Come to me and I will give you rest. In Genesis chapter 3, one of the great consequences of humankind stepping out from God's way, out of the garden, ultimately being expelled from the garden, is toil. By the sweat of your brow, you're going to have to bring forth food, because the world around you isn't necessarily going to cooperate anymore. Yes, you'll still sort of be its master, but it will be a battle to feed your family, because you have lost touch with the great overseer. So you won't know how to oversee it properly, and it will often rebel. Toil is one of the consequences of the fall. Really interestingly, when God set a people aside to be his, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew people who became the Jewish people, he enshrined principles of rest as one of their key features or values. And that is like an antidote to the fall. Yeah? Because in the fall, it's basically, you're going to have to work hard, mate. In opposition to that, if you're in relationship with God, if God is going to provide for you, if God is going to protect you, as a symbol, you can down tools. In fact, God says you must down tools at least once a week. And he instigated, there's no other thing like that in any culture, the huge high water mark of Sabbath. A day off, a day to stop striving, a day to stop achieving. If you like, I still really believe in Sabbath today. And what is Sabbath? It's a day where you just receive input and you don't try to achieve output. That is Sabbath. Input, not output. Stop feeling you've got to have output. And what he did in this culture is create a culture of discipline, because they were meant to be a culture of obedience to what God wanted, not what felt right. You know? So it would still feel right to go and plow that field, to go and get some more water, to go and crop that grain, whatever it was. That would still feel like, oh, we'll get ahead of ourselves. But in fact, you will never be replenished if you do that. And you are more important than the task. Really important in Jewish values. You are more important than the thing that you're doing. And our post-Christian culture, and I lived through this in the 80s, shifted right away from that. I remember when shops started opening on Sunday. I worked as a shop girl as my university job in the body shop. And I remember when we were expected to work on Sunday, we would be double paid. And I remember thinking that is a pressure on people, and an incentive is given to them. Oh, I get double pay. I get £20, not 10. That's the sort of levels that we were talking at back then. Yeah? For people to go that extra thing. And I remember thinking, this isn't good for us. Literally at the cold face, I remember thinking just instinctively, this isn't very good. This isn't very healthy. And I watched at the time when I first graduated, moved to London. You could walk through central London on Sunday. The place was deserted because nothing was open. The occasional cafe. That's how my job was on Edgware Road. I used to walk through the West End, and it was quiet, everything, just people having leisure and seeing it as normal. My goodness, moved in one generation for people to think that they have the right to have any time off. So, just to go into it briefly, I'd love to explore it more sometime. But not only was the Sabbath instigated, but the whole system of every 7 years, rest your fields. Rest the land. It will replenish if you rest it. And every 7 years, that's 49 years, rest everything for a whole year. All of you, rest. You know, the year of Jubilee, when everyone gets their birthright patch of land back. You know, equality is restored, so the rich don't get richer and richer and richer, and the poor don't get more and more and more disadvantaged. It's all coming from that place of trusting God, obedience under him, not doing what is right in our own eyes. And so you can see where the dislocation has happened in our culture. As we've stepped away from God, we're simply doing what feels right. More stuff produced makes us more productive. No, it doesn't. More stuff acquired makes us more happy. No, it certainly does not. It leaves us exhausted, frazzled, used up, deeply, deeply weary and bewildered, wondering what it's all about and what it's all for. Now, it's also worth saying that he also gave people 7. So every 7 years, rest your fields. Every 7 days, rest your body. 7 times a year, have a holiday on me. 7 sacred feasts or festivals, some of them which involve moving to other parts of the country to celebrate in little tents or booths. My husband would have liked it so much. He loves camping. But also he can sort out probably the whole of this church with tents. He has, we could do the Feast of the Tabernacles right here, because he always, if he can't camp, he loves to equip others to camp. He's always giving away to, oh, I've got a good sleeping bag for you. He'll say, oh, now how many people in that tent? So he can sort out everyone into Christian festivals up and down the country, because he just loves the idea of holidaying under canvas. So he was created with this culture. But that's what people used to do. Go away and celebrate me, says God. Relax, eat good food together, celebrate being community, celebrate being family, be with each other. Stop doing what you think you need to do to achieve. But people, this, and I've talked about my experience through the 80s, involves discipline. It will never seem particularly natural to switch off. It just doesn't. Always one more thing, just to get on top of, just to get this cleared. To switch off, it's a choice. It's a discipline. He disciplined a whole culture. Now, in order to live like this, we have to go against the culture radically. I remember I wasn't a Christian at university, my first degree. I remember a guy that I met, I was going to church occasionally and getting interested, saying that he took Sundays off and wasn't going to revise, although his exam was Monday. He said, oh, I tried to have a day off. He's crazy. He's absolutely bonkers. What? This is a true story from when we were later pastoring in London and had many students in our church. There was one guy who was doing classics, who chose to take a day off on Sunday and have quiet time and just have a day with God. And he didn't do the revision he knew he should have done by the Monday exam. What came up in his translation paper on the Monday exam? The Greek passage he'd been reading in the Bible on the Sunday. He'd been studying it. Isn't that a great story? Yeah? He'd literally gone through it for himself. He could do it with his eyes closed, because he'd actually spent his time in God for himself to refresh himself, rather than doing the sensible thing. So it will take choice and discipline. But Jesus said it to Mary, she's doing the better thing. Even in that culture, for a woman to say, I'm important enough to rest and listen to teaching, was extraordinarily radical. And he commended her for it, rather than saying, about your business, love. For goodness sake, go and get a tea towel. The second thing I want to say that really struck me, when he says, he doesn't say come to the idea of rest. He doesn't say come to a principle of relaxation. He doesn't say any of those things. He says, come to me. And I will teach you. Learn from me. And I would say, in my pastoral experience and also with pastoring my own life, trying to, that people who really find it difficult to ever rest, there are always trust issues involved. So to rest is to choose to trust. To choose to trust the good Father. People who find it hard to rest are often, I wrote some of the characteristics down, responsible types. So pray for Vince and me, because we're both responsible types. School prefect, married school prefect, Capable types, well, you don't need to pray for me so much, but definitely for Vince. People with a high sense of responsibility. People without switch-off buttons. Now, can I just particularly earmark a group that I really love? It's women at this time of year. Because coming up to Christmas, bye, darlings, love you. coming up to Christmas, it is really hard for women to rest. Why? Because we plug all the gaps, don't we? How can we rest when little, Tarquin's present isn't wrapped yet and I haven't got the right coloured bow? How can I rest when I haven't got the dog a present? How can I rest when we won't be seeing Bethesda and Ermintrude, and they need something to acknowledge them? So I'll just get something that I can pop in the post in a padded envelope. How can I rest when I haven't got the right padded envelope? How can I rest when I've got to get to the post? Yeah? All the details that women are so good at and so gifted at, with the massive expectations in our culture of performance around Christmas time. Help women in your life to rest. If you are one, help yourself by giving yourself permission to not be perfect. If you know a woman, if you happen to be the husband, father, brother, friend of a woman, are you helping her to rest? By not saying in a patronizing way, "Oh, put your feet up, love," but, because that's enough to but, maybe getting alongside her and carrying that laundry bin that she's balanced on her head while she's got the present for little Johnny in her teeth. Yeah? Just be there for her, because she really finds it hard. Doctors postulate that it is physically harder for women to rest than men because of the hormone surges in our body throughout the time of our lives, all the way through the reproductive seasons, estrogen and progesterone, as they sort of surge and die down and surge and die down. Apparently, it really activates the body, and then they disappear. And the whole body is sort of, whoa, what's gone on here? And certainly women report far more sleep problems than men do. I don't mean to say that men don't have problems sleeping, but they have to get to a more stressed out level to have those sort of issues. So what I would say is it's that connection with Jesus that is the antidote to all that emotional judgments on ourselves and juggling, women or men. Because he says his burden is light. So if you're staggering under something else, whose burden is that then? Is it society's? Is it your mother's? She might have gone, but is it still her? Is it yours? Have you popped it on yourself? Because it's not his. I'm sort of heading towards home here. Jesus said in the NIV that we heard earlier, the phrase was, "Learn from me." And I think it isn't a question of just stopping doing things. If you're learning from someone, you're letting him mentor you in rest. It's doing things together with him rather than just cessation of all activity. Because he can't teach you if he's not alongside you. And then I love the image that he uses in the old-fashioned version. It talks in the one we heard from the Message. It just says, "I won't lay anything heavy on you." But in the old-fashioned version, it talks about a yoke. Where's Liam? Liam, you always play Jesus for me. Would you mind? Could I borrow you a minute? Would you like to volunteer? Thank you. Thank you so much, Liam. Would you mind bringing that stool with you? Would you mind? Could you just play Act Jesus for me, Liam? There we go. Thank you. You just popped it there. So listen up, people. I saw it this way. He says his yoke is easy and light. And if Liam and I, we're naturally yoked together, he's just a bit higher than me, isn't he? So he is carrying the weight of that school run you've got to do, or that auntie you've got to please, or that supermarket run you've got to finish by tea time, or that whatever. He's carrying the weight. And here we are, a happy little pair of oxen. He's obviously very interested in ploughing, is Jesus. Do you remember how he says to Paul, who was Saul at the time, after he'd been raised from the dead, in a vision, he says, why do you kick against the goads? The goads were the things that kept oxen moving together, keeping them moving in the right direction. And he was saying, you are going off path by a long way. You're not hearing the voice of God. You're not in tune. Why are you going off? Don't you understand that your life was meant to be yoked to God and you've gone in the opposite direction? That's what he said to Paul. Yeah. So if Jesus is like the big ox and I'm just the oxlet or whatever, he would be the one that was going in the right direction and I would just be carrying along next to him. He would choose the direction, he would carry the weight. Can you come a bit closer this way? Because I want to show you what so often happens with the response. We get a bit too high, not in pride, but in sense of I ought. And then we're carrying the weight of the jolly thing. I've got to perform here. Jesus hasn't even got it on his neck anymore because we've outgrown him in our anxieties. I've got to do this. I've got to pull out all the stops. I've got to make my family happy this Christmas. I've got to be the good wife, mother, friend, church leader, gardener, PA, whatever we do. And Jesus is almost superfluous, except I suppose he could get whacked a bit by our yoke if we happen to do a quick turn. Yeah? So we're not really yoked to Jesus, are we? In practice. And he wants to show us how it's done in practice. Can you give a big thank you to Liam, who's such a good... Can you take both of those back? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Vince said this morning, he said, I found a great piece of wood for you to do whatever you need to do with a long piece of wood. He said it might be a bit damp and a bit green looking. So I thought I'd have to be a bloke. I can't, if I've got a beautiful woman next to me and she's in a shimmering, not that you aren't gorgeous, Liam, but and she's wearing something shimmering, she won't really thank me if I clop her on the shoulder with that. So rest is doing life with Jesus. It's doing life in a restful way of letting him take the responsibility. And in my life, that means constantly and consistently handing it over to him, particularly the things that cause me anxiety. I've got a big anxious thing happening today. I've got to say, Lord, this is over to you. I'm just the oxlet. You can be the big, fat, hairy one, and you can carry the weight. Yeah? And I just have to do that. So you consciously lay down your burdens. I tell you what, have a little think for me just before the end of what burdens you are carrying at the moment. Are you stressed out and heavy laden? Literally think about your burdens. What is worrying you? What is stopping you from resting? Just spend a moment considering that. While you're doing that, I'll give a bit more teaching about women and men. Apparently, women need to learn to be more like men because men, when they think about things, they problem solve. They try to get to solutions and helpful ways forward. Women, we tend to ruminate, which means we just go back over it. And wherever there's the painful place, we just go and do that and push ourselves on that same bit of pain. And that's why we get more stressed, apparently, than men do, because we push ourselves on that pain spot. Whereas men will try to find, I could do this to make it better. I could do that. So actually, it's something I read about this. And then last night, I found myself doing it. I thought, that's exactly what I do. I just go back over it to feel that pain again and to think about, oh, goodness, I must have got that wrong. And to learn to stop beating yourself up is a habit, a choice, and a discipline, actually, particularly for some of us and particularly for women. So have you got your burdens? The things you can't do, the things that make you sad, the things that overwhelm you. Now, what I want you to do is physically hold them out to God and give them to him. It's no good just giving him a quick butcher's at them. Here they are, Lord. Well, I'm taking them back. Give them right now. Spend time, think about each one. Because this passage talks about an exchange. it says, then you've given him that. What are you taking back? You're taking back his yoke where he carries the weight. You give your burdens, you take his yoke. Yeah, his way of seeing things. You know, Sue was talking about the fact that overnight, something about the fact that so many people were praying for her. She came back, the water levels rose, and she thought, God has got this. It doesn't have to be me that has this. I'm not saying that she's going to stay solid and find that easy in the weeks and months ahead, but what I'm saying is that's what we need to get to, don't we? God has got this. It is not my responsibility. I've prayed about it. It's his. So you give the burden, you take back the yoke. And you therefore take back just the fact that he owns this problem because you've given it to him. It's not yours. It's not your right to fix and your necessity to sort out. I'm just going to close with a few little practical things that might be helpful. You know what? I don't think you need to be a smoker to take a ciggy break. I really don't. I think every hour, just reboot and replenish. Take 5 minutes off. Go for a little wander mentally. Don't just sit at it, whatever it is. It's putting yourself as more important than the task again. You know, around the same time that Sunday sort of got cancelled in our culture, language changed from, if you worked for a company before, you were looked after by the personnel department, personnel, people who we've got working for us. It changed to human resources. Oh, for goodness sake. I am a resource and I happen to be vaguely humanoid on a good day. There could be technical resources, there could be material resources, and I'm a human one. Hello. It's the shift. What is the end game? The end game for that linguistic feature is presuming that the end game, the object is to make money, really, to succeed, but not the people. That's not how God sees it. It's not how God wants it to be. Take a ciggy break without a cigarette. A day off. A conscious decision to not pick up work on your day off and try to have at least one a week. And remember how I defined it, a day when you let yourself have input and don't expect yourself to give output. What does that look like for you? People, try to be disciplined about switching off your tech. Tech drives us. Tech promises us the excitement of stimulation, but it comes at us with constant oughts. Try to be disciplined about letting it go. I'm not saying completely, but choose when you want to and choose how you do it. In a positive sense, allow yourself, in fact, prioritize the things that replenish you in your week. For me, they're anything creative and anything outside. Jesus said, look at the lilies, look at the birds. You can't look at a lily if you're running past it at 50 miles an hour. You can't consider a bird if it's just flown away because you've tanked on with your hobnail boots. That involves a sense of considering, sort of a posture of observation is stasis, is relaxed, isn't it? For me, walking my lovely dog in the country, her freedom makes me free. The smell in the air of where we live, the sights, everything about the life of the place we live in, the country. Or for me, it's anything creative. It could be knitting. It could be reading a good book. It could be music. What replenishes you? It could be going to the supermarket. That could replenish you. That could be your idea of fun. I'm not telling you what replenishes you. I'm saying you should prioritize what replenishes you. I'm just ending by saying, in Isaiah 9, it says the government is on his shoulders. If you are a self-doubting juggler, like I am, we need to remember that it's not on us and make a conscious decision to do that every day, particularly where there are pinch points. PE.